The night a rescue team drove into that blizzard, they thought they were looking for two injured animals. They had no idea they were about to witness something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The road had no name on most maps, just a thin gray line cutting through pine forest in the northern backcountry, the kind of road that feels forgotten even in summer. In the middle of a February blizzard, it felt like the edge of the world. The rescue truck moved slowly, headlights swallowed whole every few yards by walls of white. Wind pressed against the windows in long, low pulses, bending the pines at angles that seemed wrong, that seemed like they shouldn't hold. Inside the cab, two members of the regional wildlife response team, a man named Dale and a younger woman named Sasha, said almost nothing. The heater hummed, the wipers struggled, the radio crackled with updates from the hikers who had called it in, their voices still shaky from what they'd seen. Two bobcats, they'd said, pressed together in the snow, not moving much, possibly one dead already. Dale had done this work for nearly 2 decades. He'd pulled animals from drainage ditches, from highway medians, from the wreckage of wildfires. He knew the particular silence that came with this kind of call, the silence of bracing. You drove toward the animal, and you hoped, but you prepared yourself for what hope sometimes couldn't fix. The GPS signal faltered twice before they found the turnout where the hikers had marked the location. Sasha stepped out first, her boots sinking deep. The cold hit with the kind of force that isn't just temperature, it's pressure, it's weight, it's the feeling of the air trying to push you back. She pulled her headlamp on and swept it in a slow arc across the roadside embankment. There, at the base of a pine, where the roots formed a shallow hollow in the ground, two shapes pressed together so tightly they looked like a single mass of fur dusted in snow. She didn't run. You learn not to run. She walked, careful, quiet, her breath fogging in short white bursts, until she was close enough to crouch down and see them clearly. Two bobcats. One larger, one smaller. The larger one was curled completely around the smaller, her body folded inward like a parenthesis, like something that had decided to become a wall. Neither moved when the light found them. For a moment Sasha's chest tightened with the familiar grief of arriving too late. She reached out with a gloved hand and touched the larger one's flank. She felt it, just barely. A shiver, faint as a whisper but real. Dale, her voice was steady, but it carried everything. They're alive, both of them. What followed was the careful, practiced work of people who have learned to move gently in the presence of fragile things. They spread the thermal blankets in the back of the truck, brought out the padded carriers, spoke to each other in low tones. The smaller bobcat was lifted first, and for a moment the larger one stirred, not in aggression but in something closer to protest. Her legs moved weakly, her head lifted an inch, and she made a sound that Dale would later describe as something between a grunt and a plea, as if she understood what was happening and needed them to know. Don't separate us. They worked as quickly and as gently as they could. Both animals were severely emaciated, their hip bones sharp beneath the fur, their paws showing early signs of frostbite, their breathing shallow and labored. But they were alive, and that, on a night like this, felt like an argument against every odd that had been stacked against them. The truck turned back toward the wildlife center, heat turned up high, the carriers secured in the back. Sasha sat between them, one hand resting near the mesh of each door, not touching, just present. The smaller bobcat lay still, exhausted but calm, but the larger one, she couldn't settle. She shifted, adjusted, shifted again. Her sides rose and fell in uneven rhythms. She made soft grunting sounds at irregular intervals, low and rhythmic, almost like a pulse. Sasha watched her for a long moment, then watched more carefully. She'd seen that kind of restlessness before in other animals, that particular combination of movement and sound, and the slow, involuntary tension that ran through the abdomen in waves. It wasn't pain from the cold. It wasn't fear. It was something else entirely. She leaned forward, looked closer. Her hands went still, her breath caught. Dale, she said quietly, I need you to drive faster. He glanced in the rearview mirror. What is it? Sasha kept her eyes on the bobcat, on the way her body moved, on the unmistakable truth of it now that she knew what she was seeing. All this time in that hollow in the snow, that large female hadn't been huddled against another adult for warmth. She hadn't been shielding a companion. She had been curled around herself, around something inside herself, holding on with everything she had against a cold that had nearly taken all of it. She was pregnant, and from the way her body was moving now, in the warmth of the truck, in the first real safety she had known in what must have been days, the birth wasn't hours away, it was minutes. "She's in labor," Sasha said. The truck accelerated into the dark. The wildlife center at midnight looks nothing like it does in daylight. The overhead lights are dimmer, the hallways quieter, the whole place holding its breath in a different way. When Dale's truck pulled into the bay, 3 staff members were already waiting, called ahead, moving without being asked, the way people move when they've done hard things together before. Mara, as they would later name her, was lifted from the carrier and placed onto a padded examination surface lined with warm towels. Her body temperature was dangerously low, her paws were swollen, the pads pale and tender. An IV line was started with the kind of practiced gentleness that never gets routine, no matter how many times you've done it. Someone placed a heating pad beneath her. Someone else dimmed the overhead light to something softer. She didn't fight them. That in itself told a story, how exhausted she truly was. The smaller Bobcat, placed in an adjacent enclosure, pressed his nose immediately to the mesh dividing them. He paced once, twice, then settled into a low crouch facing her, his eyes steady, his presence quiet but absolute. Whatever bond existed between them, it had survived the cold. It was surviving this too. Mara labored for just over 2 hours. The team gathered in near silence, not crowding her, but not leaving either. They whispered to each other in the way people do when they are witnesses to something that demands reverence. Each contraction moved through her visibly, and each time she steadied herself, something in the room steadied with her. The first kitten arrived just before 2 in the morning, barely the size of a human hand, trembling, impossibly small. Then the second. Then after a pause that lasted long enough to make everyone in that room hold their breath, the third. Mara cleaned each one with slow, deliberate care. Her movements were weak but certain, instinct carrying what her body could barely afford to give. The kittens pressed into her warmth and went still. No one spoke for a long moment. There was no applause, no celebration, just the soft sound of breathing, and the particular quiet that settles over a room when something improbable has chosen, against every reasonable expectation, to survive. Dale stood near the doorway, arms crossed, eyes wet. He'd been doing this work for 19 years. He'd never seen anything quite like this. She had arrived at the edge of death, and in the warmest, safest moment she'd known in days, she had chosen, with whatever strength remained, to bring life forward anyway. The weeks that followed moved the way recovery always does, slowly at first, then all at once. Mara's frostbite healed, her weight returned. The kittens, 2 females and a male, small enough in those first days to cup in 2 hands, grew with the quiet urgency of wild things that understand, somewhere beneath instinct, that time is not something to waste. Their eyes opened, their legs found steadiness, their voices changed from trembling mews to something sharper, more certain. The staff started calling them the Snow Family. It wasn't an official designation. It just happened one morning when one of the younger caretakers said it out loud, and no one corrected her, and after that it stuck. The male Bobcat, never fully identified as mate or sibling, simply accepted as hers, remained a steady presence in the adjacent enclosure. He had recovered faster, his youth working in his favor, but he showed no interest in moving on. He would lie pressed against the shared mesh for hours, watching Mara and the kittens with a calm that felt less like confinement and more like choice. The team documented it. They didn't fully understand it. They respected it. Mara was a patient teacher. She stalked the enrichment toys dragged through her enclosure with the focused precision of an animal remembering itself, low to the ground, weight shifting forward, eyes fixed. The kittens watched her, then imitated her, their small bodies cycling through the same motions with comic imperfection at first, then with growing accuracy. She taught them to hide when a door opened too quickly, to climb the structure in the corner of the enclosure, to be still. The caretakers found themselves visiting more than their schedules required, not to intervene, just to watch. There was something about the enclosure during those weeks that felt different from the rest of the center, quieter, more complete. But even as the room filled with that quiet warmth, the team held something harder alongside it. The kittens were growing. Mara's gaze when it found her caretakers had changed. It wasn't the dull exhaustion of her first days, nor was it dependence. It was something more difficult to name. An acknowledgement maybe, an awareness of the people who had stood beside her in the dark and asked for nothing in return. It was trust, real, unhurried, unperformed, and it was exactly why she couldn't stay. The team began quietly preparing the transition, a larger naturalized enclosure, less human presence, more sky. It was the right thing. They all knew it. Knowing it didn't make it easier. Spring came the way it always does in the north, not all at once, but in quiet negotiations. Snow pulling back from the tree line, the ground softening underfoot, the air carrying something warmer, something that smelled like beginning. The morning of the release, no one said much. The team had done releases before. It was the whole point of the work, the measure of its success. But this one sat differently in the chest. Dale drove, Sasha rode in the back, close to the carriers, her hand resting near the mesh the way it had on that first night, months ago in the dark. The ridge they'd chosen overlooked a long stretch of unbroken forest, pine and birch, and open meadow, the kind of landscape that doesn't ask anything of you except that you move through it honestly. The truck stopped. The engine went quiet. For a moment everyone just listened to the wind. The carrier doors were opened one by one. Mara stepped out first. She paused at the threshold, not from hesitation, but from the particular attentiveness of a wild animal reacquainting itself with space. Her nose lifted, her ears moved in small, precise adjustments, reading a world that was hers again. The kittens followed close, pressing briefly against her flanks before their own curiosity pulled them forward. The male emerged last, stood for a moment beside Dale without looking at him, and then walked into the brush, as if he'd simply remembered somewhere he needed to be. Mara turned once. It lasted only a second. That backward glance. Her eyes found the small group of people standing at the tree line, still and quiet. What passed in that moment wasn't sentiment. It wasn't something that could be named cleanly, or kept. It was just a look, brief and level and real. Then she turned back, gathered her young with a low sound in her throat, and walked into the green. The forest closed around them like water. The team stood for a long time after, saying nothing, which was the only appropriate response to something that large. Weeks later, a motion-triggered camera mounted on a trail post captured them. Mara moving through fresh snowmelt at dusk, her 3 young strung out behind her in a loose line, all of them strong, all of them unconcerned. She paused once in the frame, looked briefly toward the camera with the same level calm, and then continued on. The footage was watched late one night in the center's small break room. No one announced it. People just gathered, the way they had around her enclosure in those early weeks, drawn by something they couldn't quite explain, but didn't need to. She had been rescued once. What she had truly needed was the chance to do the rest herself.